Hello, BookTube. This is Weekly Reads. I've had a very good reading week, although today has been a little rough. Although I have not started reading yet, so hopefully my reading will pick things up. Anyway, I started my reading week with The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon. This is a novel that is a love letter to American comic books. The novel is about two Jewish cousins, Sam Clayman and Joseph Kavalier, who together create a number of superheroes in the golden age of comics, and who themselves have very interesting lives. Joseph more so than Sam. So the novel is divided into 6 sections. The first section, The Escape Artist, takes place in 1939. The first chapter introduces the two cousins. Joseph has just arrived in Brooklyn after having escaped Prague, which story the rest of the first part tells, and it's a doozy. The second section also takes place in 1939 over the course of a weekend, where Sam Clay, as Sam Clayman is known professionally, and Joe Kavalier, as he becomes known, convince Sam's boss to get into the comic book business. And over the course of the weekend, the cousins create The Escapist, a superhero who is a mixture of Joseph, Sam, and Joseph's younger brother, Thomas Kavalier, and another number of other superheroes for the first comic book of what would become Empire Comics. The second section is called A Couple of Boy Geniuses. The third section, The Funny Book War, takes place in 1940. The cousins, my apologies if I occasionally refer to Joe and Sammy as brothers. I don't know why, it's locked in my head, and I will try to catch it before I flub it. So the cousins are enjoying a significant amount of success with The Escapists, and also they create a few other superheroes in this section. And there are some tensions both with their employers, as of course one of the things about American superhero comics and American comics in general is that it is a deeply exploitative industry, particularly regarding the creative talent. They don't own their work. And so they get a pittance while the corporations make a killing. Also, in this section, Joseph becomes he's spoiling for a fight. Because, of course, he is from Prague, which is under Nazi occupation, and he feels frustrated that even though much of the Escapists' storylines are about fighting the Nazis, it's unsatisfying. Like, it's wish fulfillment, it's escapism, it's not really having an impact on the real world. The fourth section, The Golden Age, takes place over the course... Okay, so the Funny Book War is in 1940, and it's a year after Joseph has arrived in New York. The next section, The Golden Age, takes place over the course of 1941 and sees both cousins at the height of their success, and the height of success for The Escapist. And this is most noted in how both cousins are at their happiest. they're both entering into or have long established relationships. And then, just as the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, both cousins' lives go to hell, which leads to a separation of near over a decade, as Joseph goes to fight in World War II, which is the subject of the fifth section, Radio Man, which takes place in 1944 in Antarctica. And the sixth and final section, The League of the Golden Key, takes place in 1953, and sees a reunion of the cousins and a resolution, for the most part, of their lingering problems. I really enjoyed The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. I don't know necessarily if I would say I loved it. I really liked it. But I don't know if I loved it because, while for the most part this is an amazing novel, there are some storylines that are a bit ridiculous. The Carl Ebbing plotline, for example. Also, I'm not entirely sure Radio Man really adds much. I'm not entirely sure if you took that section out, anything would be lost. Because while perhaps there is a recognition that revenge isn't satisfying, given that it takes another 9 years for a reunion, that I don't think it necessarily quite works out. And also, I think Sammy's disaster at the end of the Golden Age, it's a bit too contrived, because it's a little too convenient that the character who's responsible for it just so happens to be related to somebody who'd been giving Joseph some trouble in his storyline. So I think that could have been handled a bit better. I mean, I understand there's what the purpose of it was, but it could have been handled a lot better, I think. So I think those were my only issues, really. So I first read The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay back in the very early 2000s, shortly after the paperback release. So it would have been 17, 18. And at the time, I was really looking for more positive, more uplifting gay stories. And I was loving The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay up until Sammy's disaster, because Sammy's love story with Tracy Bacon is really well done. But then it ends. And Sammy goes back into the closet for another 12 years. And that devastated me to such an extent that I pretty much DNF'd the book. I bailed on it and would not come back to it for over 20 years. There was a few years ago another attempt on my part to read this novel, which I was not ready for. I wasn't in the mood for modern and contemporary fiction, but I am ready. I was ready for it this time, and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And I'm very happy that I did get past that devastation that I had the first time I read it, because Tom Clay, he is an amazing character. I really liked his introduction in the final section of this novel. And I think that kind of, and I think also how at the end both cousins worked through their trauma, through their issues, was very well done. And I liked how things ended, how Joe has come home and is finally embarking on a life he could have had for well over a decade. And also Sam finally realizing that he is just done with being forced into the closet. It was, although he doesn't openly come out, that the fear of it was pretty much done. But so I really enjoyed The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. My criticisms aside. So I then moved on to Someone by Alison McDermott. This is a novel set over the course of the 20th century. It's about a woman named Marie who was born sometime in the 1920s and is living at least up until some point in the later 20th century. The novel is told in 3 parts, basically 3 super chapters. The first chapter is her youth and teenage years. And she lives in a home, in an apartment with her older brother Gabe, who is initially has a vocation for the church, and also her parents. Her father works at an office, and initially her mother is a homemaker. And so this first section introduces the characters, introduces Marie, and her first relationships. The second section, the longest section, deals with Marie mostly in her 20s as she begins to work and fall in love with the man who would eventually become her husband, as well as the issue she has with her first pregnancy and first delivery. And it's really amazingly done. And then the third section is about Marie and Tom bringing in Gabe after he has been hospitalized for a year due to a mental break. I really enjoyed Someone. It is quite a good novel. And I liked how McDermott sort of looks at the life of this one woman over the course of decades, and just how her characterization, how things sort of develop. It is really well done. The final book that I read for this reading week was Negative Blue, Selected Later Poems by Charles Wright. This collection features work selected from volumes published over the course of the 1990s, including the collections Chickamauga, Black Zodiac, Appalachia, and North American Bear. I really did not connect with the poems from Chickamauga. It wasn't until the poems from Black Zodiac that I really started to get into the collection and really start to enjoy Wright's work. And I rather liked Appalachia, although not as much as Black Zodiac, and the same is true of North American Bear. And I liked Wright's longer poems more than I did his shorter poems. So Wright's sort of his themes are the natural world, the South, a lot of reflections on what he's read, particularly Chinese poetry. So, yeah, it was a pretty interesting read. Although I don't think he is going to be an especially favorite poet of mine. I do have another selected collection of his work. I think he's rather prolific. So about once a decade or so, I think he comes out with a new, did come out with a new selected collection. But the other one is much larger. So what am I going to be reading for this reading week? I'm going to be starting with some more poetry from the New World, poems 1976 to 2014 by Jorie Graham. I have an earlier selected collection of her poetry, Dream of the Unified Field, which is one of my favorite collections. So I'm looking forward to reading this later selected collection of her poetry. And I really would like to get more of her work. I'm also hoping, perhaps over the course of the weekend or after my novel reading, to get to The Night of the Iguana by Tennessee Williams. Our Town by Thornton Wilder. And over the course of the work week, I would like to read Beloved by Toni Morrison. I think for video making next week, definitely expect a book haul. I have the first two parts of my next book haul already here, including the Wayward package from Barnes & Noble. But I'm waiting on some more, and I think they should arrive sometime next week. I'll also try to do some more tag videos, and I shouldn't say I will want to get to some discussion videos because they never work out. But I also would like to do some discussion videos, but we'll see how that works out. So anyway, BookTube, until I see you next week, thank you, have a great rest of your Friday, and have a great weekend.